He had always loved music. Even as a small boy, when other children were running outside or playing with toys, he would sit in the corner of the room and listen to the soft hum of an old piano that had been in the family for decades. The piano was not in perfect condition. Some keys were stiff, a few made strange squeaks, and the finish on the wood had faded over the years. But to him, it was the most beautiful instrument in the world. Every time he pressed a key, he felt something inside him awaken. Music made him feel alive in a way nothing else could. Life had not been easy. His family was not wealthy, and sometimes even the small things were a struggle. The piano was one of the few treasures in their modest home, and he treated it as if it were a gift sent from heaven. While other children got to take lessons at fancy music schools, he learned by listening to recordings and watching older musicians perform whenever he could. Sometimes he would stay up late into the night, pressing the keys softly in the dark, afraid of disturbing anyone, letting the music carry him away from the worries of everyday life. He was shy and quiet, did not talk much about his dreams, because he had already heard the words of doubt too many times. You are too young. You don't have enough training. You will never be good enough to perform on a real stage. The world seemed to constantly remind him that the chances of success were slim. Even some people he admired and trusted gave him advice that made him question himself. But deep down, there was a fire that refused to die. Every note he played, every melody he tried to create, strengthened that fire. Knew that music was his voice, even when words failed him. When he first heard about the upcoming local music festival, his heart raced. This was not just any event. It was one of the most prestigious gatherings of musicians in his city. People from all over would come to perform, to show off their talent, to compete for recognition. For him, it was an opportunity that seemed almost impossible to reach, and yet a small voice inside told him to try. Even if you fail, you have to go, it said, and he agreed. He had nothing to lose except fear. The weeks leading up to the festival were filled with long, grueling practice sessions. He would wake up early in the morning and play until his fingers ached, then take a short break to eat and sleep, only to start again in the afternoon. Each day he focused on improving his technique, learning new pieces and understanding the emotions behind the music. Sometimes frustration would take over. He would make mistakes that seemed impossible to correct, and the pressure of performing in front of strangers weighed heavily on him. On those days, he would sit back, close his eyes, and remind himself why he played, not for fame, not for money, but because music was a part of him. It was a companion in lonely nights and a source of joy in the quiet moments of life. Despite his hard work, many people doubted him. Fellow musicians whispered among themselves, speaking about him in tones of disbelief. He's just a kid with no real training. He won't last 5 minutes on stage. Why is he even trying? Even the audience seemed to expect a failure. It was not just skepticism. It was a kind of quiet dismissal, a belief that someone so young and inexperienced could never truly touch the hearts of listeners. Sometimes he overheard these words and felt a sting of hurt, but he did not let them stop him. He had learned early on that the world often underestimates those who work in silence. At home, his family watched him with mixed emotions. They loved him dearly and wanted him to succeed, but they worried about the disappointment he might face. "Be careful," his mother said softly one evening, watching his small hands glide over the keys. "People can be harsh. Don't let them hurt your spirit." His father nodded, silent but understanding. He did not need many words. His eyes said enough. Keep going no matter what. That quiet support meant everything to him. Every night after the house was still and quiet, he would sit at the piano, feel the worn keys under his fingers, and play with a determination that no words could express. As the day of the festival approached, the tension in him grew. The hall where the event would take place was large, grand, and intimidating. He had seen pictures of it and imagined the crowd, the bright lights, and the polished piano on stage. In his mind, he could almost feel the weight of expectation pressing down on him. He knew that many would watch him, hoping for a mistake, waiting for a sign of failure. The thought alone could have broken him, but it did not. Instead, it fueled him. He imagined playing not for them, but for the music itself, for the joy of creating something beautiful and true. In the days before the festival, he became more focused than ever. He woke up earlier, practiced longer, and listened to recordings of the great masters of piano. He tried to understand the emotions behind each piece, the stories that composers had hidden in every note. He imagined himself not just pressing the keys, but speaking through them, telling his own story without words. His practice session became more than just a routine. It became a journey, a discovery of what he was capable of. And slowly, he began to believe in himself, even as others doubted. The night before the performance, he could hardly sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the house. He thought about all the hours he had spent practicing, all the sacrifices he had made, and all the moments when he had almost given up. But he had not. He had endured, because he loved music more than anything. And that love had transformed his fear into courage. He imagined stepping onto the stage, sitting at the grand piano, and letting the music flow. He pictured the first note, the second, the third, each one carrying a piece of his soul into the world. That thought gave him peace. On the morning of the festival, he woke up early, his heart pounding with a mix of nerves and excitement. He dressed carefully, making sure every detail was right, though he knew that what mattered most was not appearance, but what he would do with his hands and his heart. His family accompanied him to the venue, offering quiet words of encouragement. Remember, his mother whispered, "Play for yourself, and the rest will follow." His father squeezed his shoulder, a silent gesture of support that spoke louder than any speech. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment and the depth of his preparation. He was ready. Backstage, he watched other performers warming up. Some were older, more experienced, with polished techniques and confident smiles. Some were already drawing attention from the crowd, while others moved with a quiet focus, much like himself. He felt a flutter of nervousness, but it was different now. It was a spark of excitement rather than fear. He reminded himself that he belonged there just as much as anyone else. He had worked for this moment, and he was not going to let doubt or expectation stop him. As the announcer called his name, he felt a surge of adrenaline. He walked toward the stage, each step carrying him closer to a moment that could change everything. The crowd was waiting, eyes fixed on him, some with curiosity, some with skepticism. He saw their expressions and felt a familiar wave of doubt that had been waiting for him all his life. But instead of shrinking away, he straightened his back, lifted his chin, and focused on the piano in front of him. This was his moment, and he would not let it slip through his fingers. He sat down at the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed his hands over the keys. For a heartbeat, he simply breathed, feeling the weight of the room and the presence of the audience. Then slowly he pressed the first key. The sound rang out, soft and clear, and it felt as though the world had paused for a single moment. He closed his eyes and let the music take over, letting every note carry his emotions, his struggles, and his dreams. The audience, at first unsure, began to lean forward, listening more closely. Something in his playing spoke to them, though they did not yet know why. And so it began, a journey that would not only test his skill, but touch the hearts of everyone who listened. The first part of his story was not just about preparing for a performance. It was about enduring doubt, overcoming fear, and embracing the love for something greater than himself. Every practice session, every sacrifice, every sleepless night had led him here. And as the music began to flow from his fingers, he realized that no expectation of failure, no whisper of doubt, could ever diminish the power of a heart that truly believed in what it loved. Behind the walls of his small apartment, he faced challenges that no one could see. While the piano brought him joy, it also demanded more than his tired hands could sometimes give. Hours of practice left his fingers sore, his back aching, and his eyes heavy. Every day was a battle against exhaustion, but he never allowed himself to quit. Each note he played was a step forward, each mistake a lesson to carry him closer to the performance he dreamed of. The old piano in the corner of his room had keys that sometimes stuck or refused to make a proper sound. When that happened, he had to improvise. He learned to press certain keys in different ways, to adjust the force of his touch, to make the music sound as beautiful as he imagined it in his mind. The imperfections of the piano became part of his learning. He learned patience and resilience, understanding that nothing perfect ever comes without effort. Even when his hands ached or the sound was not exactly right, he continued. The music inside him demanded it. Many nights the room was completely silent, except for the soft notes he produced. He played slowly at first, carefully, making sure every note was clear. Then, as he grew more confident, he allowed himself to let the music flow freely, to follow his instincts. Music became a way to express emotions he could never put into words. Joy, fear, hope, sadness, excitement, all of it came alive through his fingers. Sometimes tears would slide down his cheeks as he played, and other times he would smile through the pain and exhaustion. The piano was not just an instrument. It was a friend, a teacher, and a mirror to his soul. There were moments when doubt crept in. He would hear voices in his mind saying he was not good enough, that he would fail, that the audience would laugh or turn away. Those moments were terrifying. Sometimes he would stop and stare at the piano, wondering if all the effort was worth it. But then he would remember why he loved music. He remembered the way the notes could lift him out of sadness, how a melody could make him feel lighter, happier, more alive. That love for music overpowered the fear. He reminded himself that every great musician had faced doubt. Every performer had stumbled, and every artist had been told they could not succeed. It was part of the journey, not the end of it. He did not have fancy teachers or expensive lessons. Most of what he learned came from watching videos, listening to recordings, and practicing relentlessly. Sometimes neighbors would come by, curious about the music that floated through the walls. A few would offer kind words, encouragement, or advice, but many were skeptical. You are talented, yes, one neighbor said once, but this festival is something else. You may not be ready. Instead of feeling discouraged, he took those words as a challenge. If people believed he might fail, he would work harder to prove them wrong, not for their approval, but for himself. His family supported him quietly. They did not fully understand the world of music or the pressure he felt, but they trusted his passion. In the evenings, his mother would bring him tea or a small snack, and they would sit in the next room, listening to him play. She never criticized, never offered advice that would make him doubt himself. His father often watched him in silence, a proud smile hidden beneath a calm expression. Their support was gentle but powerful, giving him strength on days when he felt weak. Knowing that he had people who believed in him, even in small ways, made a difference he could not fully describe. He often practiced for hours without a break, carefully memorizing each piece, analyzing every note, every chord, and every pause. He imagined himself on the big stage, feeling the pressure of an audience waiting to judge, hoping for failure. In his mind, he replayed the performance over and over, adjusting, improving, and perfecting it. He even imagined the mistakes he might make and practiced how to recover from them smoothly. His mind became as trained as his fingers. Every moment of preparation was a step toward turning fear into confidence. There were also moments of inspiration. Late at night, when the city outside had fallen asleep, he would sit at the piano and allow his imagination to guide him. He would experiment with melodies, blending pieces he had learned with his own creative ideas. Sometimes the music would surprise him, moving in ways he had never expected. Those nights reminded him that music was not just about technical skill, it was about emotion, heart, and storytelling. Every melody he created was a small victory, proof that he could communicate feelings that words could never capture. As the festival drew closer, the pressure increased. He began to notice small things that might make him nervous. The thought of being judged by strangers, the possibility of forgetting a note, the fear that he might not live up to his own expectations. Sleep became harder to find. Sometimes he would lie awake staring at the ceiling, playing every part of the music in his mind, imagining the sound in the large hall. The weight of anticipation was heavy, but he learned to channel it into energy. Instead of letting anxiety paralyze him, he used it to sharpen his focus. To make every practice session count more than ever, he also started to face physical challenges. Hours of practice caused blisters, and sometimes his wrists would ache from overuse. There were mornings when his fingers refused to move as smoothly as he wanted, when even simple scales felt like a challenge. But he refused to let pain stop him. He learned to warm up carefully, to stretch, to take brief rests, and then return to the piano. His body became an instrument too, trained to serve the music. Every ache and soreness became a reminder of his dedication, proof that he was willing to endure discomfort for the sake of his dream. Not everyone believed in him. That sometimes stung. A few of his peers, those who had performed at festivals before, would make comments meant to discourage him. "The stage is no place for someone like you," they said casually. "You won't impress anyone." Those words might have crushed someone else, but he only let them ignite determination. He thought to himself, if they are so sure he will fail, then he must do everything in his power to show them otherwise. He did not crave their approval, but he wanted to prove that talent and hard work could speak louder than doubt and criticism. His practice sessions were not always easy. Some days frustration would take over and he would slam his hands on the keys in anger, curse himself for mistakes, or feel tears welling up in his eyes. Those moments were frightening, and sometimes he felt like giving up. But deep inside, there was a small voice that refused to let him quit. "Keep going," it whispered. "You can do this. You belong here." That voice became his anchor. No matter how many times he stumbled, he returned to the piano, willing to try again, willing to learn from failure, willing to keep chasing the music that defined him. Sometimes, he would watch videos of great performances, noticing the subtle movements, the expressions, the way emotions flowed through the music. He would mimic them, study them, and then add his own touch, creating a style that was uniquely his. He knew that technical skill alone was not enough. Music needed soul. That understanding gave him patience. He spent hours not just learning notes, but learning feeling. He learned how to convey sadness without melodrama, joy without exaggeration, and hope without sentimentality. Music became more than sound. It became a story. It's a language of the heart. During this time, he also began to visualize the audience. He imagined them not as critics, but as people who could be moved, inspired, and touched by the music. That visualization helped him feel less afraid of judgment and more focused on connection. He imagined a grandmother smiling as she listened, a child leaning forward with wonder, a teacher nodding in recognition. These mental images became motivation. They reminded him that his purpose was not to impress, but to communicate, to share a part of himself through the piano. He even started small experiments with performance. He played in front of friends and family, asking for honest opinions. Sometimes they praised him, and sometimes they offered suggestions. He took everything in, not letting praise make him complacent, nor criticism make him discouraged. Each session was a lesson in humility and growth. He learned how to face an audience, how to breathe, how to stay calm under pressure. Little by little, he became more comfortable performing, even when the room was silent and all eyes were on him. Through all these struggles, one thing remained constant: his love for music. Even on the hardest days, when fingers ached, when doubts whispered in his ear, when the future seemed uncertain, he returned to the piano. It was a place of solace, a place where he could be himself, a place where the world made sense. Music gave him strength, hope, and courage. It taught him patience, resilience, and the power of perseverance. And it reminded him every single day why he had chosen this path, no matter how difficult or uncertain it might be. By the time the festival was only days away, he had transformed. He was still the same young man with modest means, still facing doubts from others, still carrying the weight of expectation, but he had grown stronger. His fingers moved with confidence, his mind was focused, and his heart was full of music. He had endured pain, frustration, and fear, and he had emerged more determined than ever. The struggles behind the scenes had prepared him for what was to come. They had shaped him, strengthened him, reminded him that true talent is not measured by natural skill alone, but by perseverance, heart, and unwavering dedication. He looked at the piano in the quiet of his room, a small smile crossing his face. It had been a long journey, filled with hard work and sacrifice, but he knew that all of it mattered. The doubts of others, the aches and frustrations, the lonely nights they had, all led him to this moment. And no matter what happened on the stage, he had already proven something to himself. That love for music, coupled with courage and effort, could overcome almost anything. And so, with one final deep breath, He pressed the keys once more, letting the music fill the room, carrying away fear, frustration, and doubt. Behind the scenes, he was ready, not just for the festival, but for the journey ahead, for the chance to share his heart with the world, and to let his music speak for him in ways words never could. The day of the festival had finally arrived. He woke up early, his stomach tight with a mix of nerves and excitement. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of his room, and he could hear the soft sounds of the city slowly coming to life. It was a day he had imagined for months, and yet now that it was here, it felt almost unreal. He got dressed carefully, choosing clothes that were simple but neat, because he knew that what mattered most was not how he looked, but what he would do with his hands and heart. On the way to the venue, his mind raced. He imagined the large hall, the polished piano on stage, and the crowd waiting to judge him. Some would be there to celebrate music, some to witness talent, and others he feared were hoping for failure. He tried not to think about them too much, focusing instead on the hours he had spent practicing, the lessons he had learned, and the music he had created in the quiet of his room. Each note he had played had prepared him for this moment. When he arrived, the hall was even more impressive than he had imagined. High ceilings stretched above him, chandeliers sparkled in the soft light, and the polished wooden floor reflected the stage like a mirror. Musicians were already warming up, their fingers moving effortlessly across their instruments. Some smiled confidently, exchanging greetings and laughter. Others focused silently as he had, letting the music carry them. He felt a flutter of nervousness. Seeing the experience and polish of the performers around him, backstage, he found a quiet corner and took a deep breath. The noise of the crowd, the chatter of performers, and the distant applause from earlier performances all created a dizzying atmosphere. He closed his eyes and imagined the piano waiting for him on stage, the music flowing freely and the audience listening with hearts open. That vision gave him a strange calm. For the first time that morning, he felt the excitement of performing outweigh the fear of failing. He could hear the announcer calling names, the smooth voice echoing across the hall. One by one, performers took the stage, playing pieces that dazzled the audience. Some were fast, technical, and flawless, while others were emotional, flowing, and moving. He watched each performance carefully, learning what resonated with the audience, noticing how the hall responded to each note. Some performers received applause and cheers, while others finished with polite claps. He studied it all, reminding himself that he did not need to impress anyone. He only needed to play from his heart. Finally, it was his turn. The announcer called his name, and the room seemed to hold its breath. He stood, his legs trembling slightly, and walked toward the stage. Every step felt heavy, as though the air itself weighed him down. The lights above were bright, and he could feel the eyes of hundreds of people upon him. Some faces were curious, some skeptical, and some expectant. He swallowed hard and took another deep breath, reminding himself that he had prepared for this moment for months. He reached the grand piano, its polished surface gleaming under the stage lights. He touched the bench, adjusted his seat, and carefully placed his hands on the keys. For a moment, he simply sat there, letting the sounds of the hall wash over him, the faint rustle of programs, the soft cough of an audience member, the distant hum of air conditioning. Then he took another deep breath and pressed the first key. The note rang out clearly, soft but confident. He closed his eyes and let the music flow. The first few notes were careful, tentative, as if he were testing the water. He could feel the audience listening, waiting, some perhaps expecting mistakes. But as he continued, his confidence grew. Each note became more assured, each chord more fluid. He could feel the music moving through him, not just from his fingers, but from somewhere deep inside, as if his heart itself were guiding the melody. At first, the audience watched politely. Some whispered to neighbors, others leaned forward in their seats. But slowly, the atmosphere began to change. There was a stillness that was almost sacred. People stopped shifting in their seats, stopped fidgeting, and allowed themselves to be carried by the sound. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but he noticed it. The music was reaching them. His hands moved faster now, not in haste, but in harmony with the emotions he was pouring into the piano. Every note told a story of struggle, of hope, of courage, and of determination as he played. He lost all sense of time and space. The stage, the lights, the audience, they all faded away, leaving only the music in him. His fingers moved over the keys almost automatically, guided by years of practice and the passion that burned inside him. There were moments of softness, delicate and tender, where a single note seemed to echo into the hearts of the listeners. Then there were moments of strength and intensity, where the music swelled and filled the hall, demanding attention and respect. Each shift, each pause, each crescendo carried emotion that words could never convey. He could sense the reactions around him, though he did not look. A hand clutched a program too tightly, knuckles white. An elderly woman's eyes glistened with unshed tears. A young boy leaned forward, eyes wide, captivated. Even the skeptical faces he had feared seemed to soften, as if the music had broken through their doubt. He did not play to impress them. He played because he had no choice. The piano was an extension of his soul, and the music demanded expression. It was not about applause or recognition. It was about connection, about speaking to people in the only language that could touch their hearts so deeply. The piece reached its middle section, where the tempo quickened and the notes became more complex. His fingers flew over the keys, each one precise, each one intentional. The hall seemed to hold its collective breath. Even the subtle mistakes, which sometimes occurred, only added character. A reminder that this was a live human performance full of emotion and imperfection. He embraced every note, every chord, every silence, knowing that the music was alive and he was alive within it. He could feel a sense of transformation in the audience. What had begun as polite attention had become something more profound. The skepticism, the whispers of doubt, the expectation of failure, they all seemed to melt away under the power of the music. He was no longer just a young man playing piano. He was a storyteller, a messenger, a creator of moments that would linger in the hearts of those listening. Every sound, every pause, every subtle shift carried meaning. He could sense it in the stillness of the hall, in the way people leaned in the way breaths were held. Then came the climax of the piece. The music built, layer upon layer, swelling with intensity and emotion. His hands moved almost faster than thought, guided by instinct and memory. Each note was deliberate, each chord purposeful. He felt the power of the music resonate through his entire body. The hall vibrated with sound, the audience almost trembling in response. It was a moment of pure connection, where performer and listener became one through the language of music. As the final notes approached, slowed, letting each one linger in the air. The silence between the last chords seemed eternal, heavy with anticipation. Then, the last note rang out, clear and resonant, leaving a stillness that seemed to last longer than a heartbeat. For a moment, there was complete silence. No one moved, no one breathed too loudly. The audience was suspended in awe, suspended in emotion, suspended in the power of what they had just experienced. And then the hall erupted. Applause thundered, claps echoed, cheers filled the space. People stood, some with tears in their eyes, others smiling, others shaking their heads in disbelief. He rose from the bench, hands trembling slightly, and took a small bow. The applause did not matter as much as the realization that he had done it. He had reached them, touched them, and shared a part of himself that no words could convey. He had proven, if only to himself, that his music had power, depth, and meaning. Backstage, after the performance, he was overwhelmed with emotion. His hands still tingled from the intensity of playing and his heart raced. Fellow performers came to congratulate him, some genuinely impressed, some surprised. The audience lingered in conversation, discussing the performance, sharing how moved they felt. Even those who had doubted him could not deny the impact he had made. He smiled quietly, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and deep satisfaction. That day he realized something important. The music was not just about skill or training. It was about heart, emotion, and courage. It was about facing fear, embracing imperfection, and giving everything he had, no matter the expectation of others. He had stepped onto the stage not as someone seeking approval, but as someone sharing a truth, and that truth had spoken to everyone who listened. It was a lesson that would stay with him forever, that when passion meets perseverance, even the quietest voice can be heard, even the most overlooked talent can leave a mark, and even a doubtful audience can be moved to the core. As he left the stage that evening, he felt a new sense of confidence. He had faced his fears, endured the pressure, and emerged victorious in a way that mattered most, not for applause, not for recognition, but for the music and the connection it created. The festival had been a proving ground, not just for his skill, but for his heart. And in that moment, he knew that this was only the beginning. The applause had barely begun to fade when he realized something remarkable. The audience was not just clapping, they were moved. People were whispering to one another, some with tears in their eyes, others nodding in quiet admiration. He had expected polite appreciation, perhaps a round of applause, and then a swift return to the next performance. Instead, he saw faces that reflected genuine awe, surprise, and even joy. For a moment, he felt almost weightless, as if the music had lifted him above the room, above the expectations, and into a place where only emotion existed. He stepped back from the piano, trying to collect himself, but he could still hear the soft murmurs of the audience. Some were discussing the technical brilliance of the performance, others were moved by the emotion behind each note, and some were simply amazed that such a young person could convey such depth. It was overwhelming, but in the best way. The realization sank in. He had not only played music, he had told a story, and the story had resonated with everyone in the room. As he looked around, he noticed the faces of people who had doubted him before. Some had come with raised eyebrows, expecting a performance that would fall short. Now they were silent, eyes wide, expressions softened by what they had just witnessed. He could feel the shift in energy, the way the atmosphere of skepticism transformed into admiration. It was a strange and powerful feeling to know that he had changed the minds and hearts of people simply by being true to himself and the music he loved. He allowed himself a small, quiet smile. He had not played to prove them wrong, but it was undeniable that the impact was satisfying. Every hour of practice, every late night, every aching hand had led to this moment. The music had become more than sound. It had become a bridge between him and the audience, connecting them in ways that words could not. And that connection, that shared emotion, was far more important than any applause or recognition he could receive. The piece he had performed was not simple, and he knew it. There were moments of subtlety, quiet passages that required careful control, and intense sections that demanded precision and energy. Every element had been designed to convey emotion, to take the listener on a journey, and now he could see that it had succeeded. Some people were wiping tears from their eyes. Others were leaning forward as if they could feel the music physically. The effect was undeniable. He had touched something deep within them, backstage. The other performers were watching with mixed reactions. Some approached him with congratulations, praising his skill and expressing how moved they had been. Others were silent, perhaps surprised, perhaps reflecting on their own performances. One older musician, someone he had admired from afar, came to him and simply said, "You have a gift. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." Those words, spoken softly but sincerely, carried more weight than any audience applause. It was recognition from someone who understood the craft, someone who had experienced the same pressures and triumphs. He took a moment to breathe, letting the emotions of the performance sink in. His hands still tingled from the intensity of playing. His heart raced with excitement and relief, and a quiet joy spread through him. The experience had been transformative. He had faced fear, embraced vulnerability, and emerged not just successful, but changed. The music had allowed him to express a part of himself that words could not touch, and in return, the audience had responded with an openness that was both humbling and exhilarating. As the festival continued, he noticed that the energy in the hall had shifted. The audience seemed more attentive, more engaged, more willing to feel and experience each performance. It was as if the music had opened a door, inviting them to listen with their hearts as well as their ears. Fellow performers began to adjust, noticing the impact of his performance. and some even sought him out later for advice or simply to express admiration. He realized that the ripple effect of his music extended beyond himself and had influenced others, inspired them, and perhaps even changed their perception of what was possible. Despite the external praise, he remained focused on the most important lesson of the day. Music was not about approval, recognition, or comparison. It was about expression, connection, and truth. Each note, each chord, each pause carried meaning, and when played with sincerity, it had the power to reach hearts. That understanding gave him a quiet confidence, a sense of purpose that went beyond the festival, beyond the applause, beyond the momentary thrill of success. It was something deeper, more enduring, and far more meaningful. He remembered the nights spent alone at the piano, the aches, the mistakes, the doubts, and the moments of quiet triumph when a melody finally sounded right. Those memories were no longer just preparation. They were the foundation of what he had accomplished. The audience may have heard the music, but he had lived it, felt it, and made it his own long before stepping onto the stage. And that, he realized, was the true power of perseverance and passion. People continued to approach him throughout the day. Some asked questions about his technique, others about his inspiration. A few simply wanted to express how deeply the music had touched them. He answered politely, sometimes with words, but often with a quiet smile, knowing that words could never fully capture the experience. The connection he had created through music was beyond language. It was emotional, visceral, and unforgettable. By the end of the day, festival organizers invited him to perform again for a smaller, more intimate audience. He accepted, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to share the music. To continue the journey that had begun on that stage, each performance became a chance to refine, to explore, and to connect. And with every note, he felt more certain that he had found his calling, not just as a pianist, but as a storyteller, a messenger, and a bridge between hearts. That evening, as he returned home, exhaustion mixed with exhilaration. He had given everything, and the results were beyond what he had imagined. The world had expected a failure, but he had delivered something far greater than mere technical skill. He had shared a piece of his soul, and the audience had recognized and responded to it. It was a triumph not measured in applause or awards, but in connection, emotion, and authenticity. As he sat quietly in his room later that night, reflecting on the day, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the music that had guided him, for the piano that had been his constant companion, for the family who had supported him quietly but faithfully, and for the audience who had opened their hearts to him. The experience had reinforced a truth he already believed. Dedication, passion, and sincerity could overcome doubt, fear, and even low expectations. He knew that this was not the end. There would be more performances, more challenges, and perhaps more skepticism along the way. But now he had proof not from others, but from himself, that he could rise to the occasion, that he could touch hearts through music, and that he could remain true to his passion no matter the obstacles. The festival had been a defining moment, a turning point, and a confirmation that the journey he had begun alone in his room had a purpose far greater than he had imagined, and so he prepared to rest, to recover, and to dream once more. The music that had carried him through fear, doubt, and struggle would continue to guide him. The applause, admiration, and connection of the audience would stay with him. But more importantly, he carried a new understanding of his own strength, resilience, and purpose. He had faced expectations of failure and transformed them into a moment of triumph, and that knowledge would fuel every note he played in the future. In the quiet of his room, he touched the keys one last time that night. Not for an audience, not for recognition, not for applause, just for himself. The notes were soft, gentle, and deliberate, a reflection of everything he had experienced that day. Each sound carried memory, emotion, and gratitude, and as he played, he smiled quietly, knowing that the journey was only beginning, that the music had many more stories to tell, and that he was ready to listen, create, and share, no matter what challenges lay ahead. After the festival, his life felt different, though nothing about the world had changed. The streets were the same, The old piano still sat in the corner of his room, and his modest apartment remained quiet and simple. Yet something inside him had shifted. The experience of performing, of connecting with hundreds of strangers through music, had awakened a new sense of confidence, purpose, and possibility. He understood that what he had accomplished was not just a single performance, but the beginning of a journey that would shape the rest of his life. People began to notice him in ways he had never imagined. Fellow musicians who had once doubted him now sought his advice or simply offered congratulations. Some organizers of music events reached out to invite him to perform again at bigger halls and for larger audiences. While he appreciated the recognition, he remained grounded. He knew that the applause, awards, or invitations were not the true measure of his journey. What mattered most was the music itself, the connection he could make through it, and the perseverance that had brought him this far. Every time he played, he remembered the nights spent practicing alone, the times his hands ached, the moments of doubt, and the victories hidden in small improvements. Those memories were the foundation of his growth. They reminded him that success was not a sudden magical event, but the result of countless hours of dedication, patience, and courage. Even as new opportunities came his way, he never forgot the lessons learned in those quiet rooms with his old piano. Learning to bend the imperfect instrument to his will and learning to trust his own instincts. He continued to practice with the same intensity, but now he approached it with a deeper understanding. Practice was no longer just about mastering notes or memorizing pieces. It was about exploring emotions, understanding nuance, and communicating with honesty. Each session became a chance to experiment, to refine, and to discover something new within himself and the music. He allowed himself to be vulnerable in every performance. Knowing that authenticity was more powerful than perfection, the audience's reaction at the festival remained in his mind. He remembered the stillness, the soft gasps, the silent awe, and the thunderous applause at the end. It had shown him the power of music to reach people in a way that words often could not. He realized that his gift was not only in technical skill, but in the ability to convey emotion and story through sound. That understanding gave him a sense of responsibility. He was not simply playing notes. He was communicating, sharing a part of himself, touching the hearts of those who listened. Opportunities continued to appear. Invitations came from schools, community centers, and local music groups asking him to perform. Sometimes he felt nervous, wondering if he could recreate the intensity and connection of that first festival performance. Yet each time he approached the piano with the same mindset, not to impress, but to express. And each time, he discovered that honesty in music transcended fear. The audience may have changed, the setting may have varied, but the essence remained the same. Music was the bridge, and he had learned to cross it with courage and heart.